BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
This is a download of Farming Today from the BBC. The presenter today, Sybil Ruscoe.
Good morning. A leading food expert asks, are we getting all the facts we need from the government to prepare for a no-deal Brexit? But first, one of the best ways for us to hear what you think of farming today is via social media. And by the way, we're at BBC Farming Today on Twitter if you want to join the conversation. There are many farmers who've embraced social media from the start. People like Gareth Wynne-Jones in North Wales and Jake Freestone in the Cotswolds both have big followings. This time last year as well, Farming Today went viral with our combine karaoke with Herefordshire farmer Ali Hunter-Blair. And all this week we're taking a look at social media in farming, and we're starting in Bride on the Isle of Man, where Alison Tier has a herd of 130 Galloways. She also runs a company called Social Jungle, coaching farmers on how to connect.
We were early adopters in social media, so the agricultural industry took to Twitter sort of out of the gate, which was quite incredible really, but it was a real platform that we took to.
And do you think it's always positive? I'm thinking that some farmers do have to take, say, the rough with the smooth when you think about some things that animal rights campaigners may say, or vegans, or even people who are keen on the environment. It can be tough sometimes, can't it?
It can be. I mean, I think the advice I would give is find a platform where you're comfortable to start with. And then, use your settings. So you do have settings within each social platform, so you can set your security levels there. I think you're never going to please everybody. I think that's the thing. So it's a social networking space online. And it would be the same if you went into a very large conference or, apart from a lot of the time it's anonymous, which is the horrible thing about it. I would say that I wouldn't let it put people off, because if you use your settings properly, you can just talk to the people that you want to and influence the people that you want to.
I've often found as well, talking to farmers, that it's a useful tool to combat isolation in the countryside. Have you found that?
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I just love about social media, because I do feel it gets a bad rep, but you can use it very positively. And I've just seen some great stories where people are finding their voice.
And when I was at the Three Counties show recently, farmers were talking about how they think it's important to tell the consumer their food stories. Do you think that's becoming more important as well?
Absolutely. This is where the opportunity lies. I feel that there's such a massive disconnect between food and farming at the moment. And ultimately, we can change that. We can raise our voice in a really positive way and start to talk about food and how it's produced and where it's produced, and actually visually show that by documenting, by storytelling. And it's so, so important, but not as easy as it looks. I think sometimes people think it's, you could just jump on and do it. But when it comes to doing it, that's where, having some backing and some training and, people to guide you through and other people, to help you is a good idea.
That's Alison Tier, and please don't forget to follow us on Twitter. We're at BBC Farming Today, and of course we're always keen to read what you've got to say about us. Now, this is a milestone week for the global relationship between farmland and climate change. We'll see the publication of a special report by United Nations scientists from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It'll cover the exploitation of land, farming practices and flooding, and how they contribute to global warming. This comes as the clean-up operation continues after floods in the Yorkshire Dales. Farmers have lost livestock and water has washed tons of rubble across their fields. On Twitter, environmental campaigner Ben Goldsmith has provoked an angry response by blaming overgrazing for the flooding. Drained, eroded, scorched uplands, he said, can't store rainfall as nature intended. You might recall he was appointed as a DEFRA non-executive board member by Michael Gove back in March. Now, the Uplands Alliance is a network of people, including farmers and conservationists, who say they're passionate about Britain's hills. Julia Aglionby is the chairperson, and I asked her for her reaction to Mr Goldsmith's comments.
Well, we could say that flooding is of our own making in the sense that it's been caused by climate change, which has been caused by humans' impact on the environment. But when we look at the situation in Swaledale, the farmers there and the landowners have been working incredibly hard over the last 10 years, and increasingly so over the last couple of years, to restore Blanket Bog and to mitigate against flooding events.
He's saying it's overgrazed and drained and eroded, and that farmers really ought to be doing more to prevent flooding.
Well, it's really interesting because I've been working very intensively for the last 2 years with the commoners and the landowners in Upper Swalesdale, and we had a feasibility study commissioned by the commoners. North Pennines AONB undertook it, and they said that the grazing levels there, this is on 4,000 hectares, were completely consistent with the restoration of blanket bog. No reduction in grazing was required, and those results were confirmed by Natural England. Functioning blanket bog acts as a massive sponge, so it absorbs water when it rains and it holds it there, and then when the rain has stopped, it gently releases it and it goes downstream. But the other thing that we really need to bear in mind is that a lot of rain fell in a short time. Inevitably, the sponge is already full. So however good your the flow is, if the sponge is already full, inevitably the rain will run off fast.
Ben Goldsmith did go on to say that the idea of public money for public goods post-Brexit could actually be something that could make an effort to hold back rainwater and reduce flooding. Do you agree with him that that change can't come soon enough?
I would suggest that the government look at changing the rules with regard to the current schemes, and therefore farmers and landowners will be able to do more faster. The new schemes will enable farmers and landowners to be properly rewarded, whether they are tenants, whether they are commoners, whether they are owner-occupiers, or whether they are landowners. It's really important that those who do the work and those who protect downstream communities are properly rewarded. So that's something that Ben and I agree on.
Now, what happens on November the 1st after a no-deal Brexit? There have been predictions of trucks queuing at the ports, disruption in the supplies of healthy fruit and veg in the supermarket, and a 10% jump in the price of food. Is that scaremongering or a reality? A leading food policy expert says we don't know all the facts and is calling on the government to reveal its emergency food policy for a no-deal. Last week, the government said it was spending £139 million on a Brexit public information campaign, the biggest since the Second World War. But Tim Lang, Professor of Food Policy at City, University of London, is calling on the government to share what it's basing its plans on. What do we know so far?
Plans have been leaking out for quite a bit. If you remember, Sir Mark Sedwill, the Cabinet Secretary and National Security Advisor, had an entire 14-page memo leaked, presumably by someone from the Cabinet, on the beginning of April. But the details have got clearer. There's much more talk now among the cognoscenti of flows of trucks dropping by a third or more within a day. You know, the government's already been clear saying that it expects large numbers of trucks not to have smooth transit because they haven't got the right paperwork. They're expecting food price rises of at least 10%. Sir Mark said that back in April. If the pound goes down, we can assume that will go even more. A drop of imports from EU and other countries to maybe a half. I've heard some people say 40% down, some people saying 50, one even saying after 3 months we can expect at best it might get to 50 to 70%. These are big figures, and the point of my paper in the Lancet was just saying, look, if these calculations have been made, we need to know what's the method, how's it been done, who's done it, and secondly, are they going to actually tell the public this? We know now the Chancellor has allocated £138 million for information. Let's hope it's not wool over the eyes. Let's see these figures published.
And what do you fear?
Well, I'm a public health man, and generally within food policy, I personally fear the loss of fresh fruit and vegetables because we're not even meeting as a country the Public Health England's and the UK's advice of what we should be eating. We import £11.1 billion worth of fruit and vegetables from within the EU. We get, 30% of our food from the EU member states plus another 11% through trade deals done with the EU. That's a heck of a lot of food that we're importing via the EU genuine trade deals with the EU, if those are disrupted by 30, 40, 50, 70%, and it goes on for months, which is what many people have told me is the assumption now within government, well, no wonder the Institute for Government, the think tank, said last week these planning assumptions are kept under strict lock and key in ministries. I just think, in public health terms, that's ludicrous. Get it out. Let's tell the public.
But Tim, if they are emergency plans, shouldn't a government be keeping emergency plans like that under wraps because they are so important? And aren't you just guilty of sort of scaremongering and encouraging people to panic buy?
No, certainly not. I'm actually on record for at least 2 years of saying do not panic buy. If this is what the government thinks is going to happen, where does it think the public is going to get its fruit and vegetables from? Or is it going to actually drop public health advice? I don't think that's being alarmist. I think it is very serious, but it's not me that's making that. This is government planning.
Professor Tim Lang. We asked DEFRA for a response and they gave us this statement. They said, we have a highly resilient food supply chain and consumers in the UK have access to a range of sources of food. This will continue to be the case whether we leave the EU with or without a deal. Producing in Bristol is Beatrice Fenton and I'm Sybil Ruscoe. Now, it's been a turbulent time weather-wise in some parts of the country, so how's it looking for the week ahead? Here's the Farming Today 5-day forecast from the BBC Weather Centre.